a shining light in America's darker hours. Slavery and the Civil War stand as some of the darker days in American history. Largely, this period of human history is given as the reason that America must only be bad. There is much that has been bad. There's no debate about that. In fact, it's hard to overstate the bad, actually. But there is much good that is forgotten and should be remembered. There are shining lights in America's darker hours. Though slavery has been a horrible human practice in all generations and in all lands, the upside for America is that we abolished the practice within 150 years. Surely this is a point to remember, and many died fighting for it. The bloodiest war on American soil was fought between the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. The casualty estimates range between 600,000 and 800,000 American lives. Disease was rampant, living conditions were horrid, 2% of the American population was wiped out. The war was bloody, the injuries gruesome. The battle lines, often in regiments, grouped up in fields, firing back and forth upon one another. The wounded and deceased littered the landscape after long days of battle, made worse by the fact that both sides underestimated how hard the other side would fight for their cause. In the middle of cannon explosions and artillery, the endless firing sound of muskets, burnt black powder filling the air with its scent and smoke, the groans and screams of the injured for help, the gruesome injuries, and those who perished laying as far as the eye could see, the continual commands leading the armies in the middle of all of that horrific scene. Who cares for the wounded soldiers? Who helped those wounded Americans? The wounded and deceased often needed care right in the middle of battle. Overwhelming injury, disease, and death. 50% died from disease, 50% from casualties of war. Hospitals did not litter the landscape. Every town did not have multiple medical practices. There were no ambulances to speed people off to an emergency room 5 minutes away. There was no way for the shooting to stop, to offer assistance and aid to the injured. We didn't have endless funeral homes to carry away the bodies to. Everyone was surrounded by death all of the time. And the battles were across the American countryside, far from where the best help could be found. At the beginning of the war, the Union Army had barely 100 doctors. And then there were medics and stretcher carriers. Those numbers grew exponentially through wartime, and so did medical advancements. One American heroine who does shine in America's darker hours, who risked her life for the care of the injured, was Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. She's a controversial figure for various reasons, but we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater regarding every possible opinion. What is heroic is her willingness, at great risk, to care for the wounded in hostile conditions, particularly in the Battle of Chickamauga, second only to Gettysburg in casualties. With estimates of over 30,000 casualties and many more wounded, Dr. Walker entered the battlefield to treat the wounded. Not after the battle, not in the evening once the fire had quieted. In the middle of heavy fire, she went soldier to soldier offering needed care. No regard whatsoever for her own personal safety. It's really just remarkable. But her service does not stop there. Soon, the Union troops had to retreat from her location, but she was seen crossing the battlefield to treat Union troops who were left behind. Bandages, surgeries, right then and there, aid with whatever she could find to save lives and offer assistance. As you can imagine, supporting Union soldiers was not taken lightly by the Confederates. She was captured, but she did not immediately surrender her efforts. She continued to offer any aid needed to both Union and Confederate soldiers, thereby crossing enemy lines for humanitarian good. A great example demonstrating that humanity transcends ideological divide. Eventually, she was put in a Confederate prison camp where she continued to treat soldiers and civilian casualties of the war. She never stopped. She also was known to share her own meal rations to give more sustenance to those who were sick or injured. Her story is inspiring on many levels. She was committed to humanitarian service beyond opinions and political divides, even when her own life was hanging in the balance, or when she was punished for being on the wrong side of the battle. Her medical skill and moral courage during the Civil War's darkest hours makes her a true American heroine. She was rewarded the Medal of Honor, the only woman at the time, by President Andrew Johnson. Her citation reads, "Upon the recommendation of Major Generals Sherman and Thomas, and faithfully served as a contract surgeon in the service of the United States, she has devoted herself with much patriotic zeal to the sick and wounded soldiers, both in the field and in hospitals, to the detriment of her own health, and has also endured hardships as a prisoner of war 4 months in a Southern prison while acting as a contract surgeon." You know, the American spirit has a way of pulling together, even through difficult times. We see one another not just as enemies, not just as less than for some reason, but as Americans, as humans. More than that, we see humanity. When humanity needs help, we rise to the occasion. We help the weak, the sick, the injured. We lift up the downtrodden, even when they are our enemies. After all, we do not ask who someone voted for when we come upon a car accident with injuries before we offer help and assistance. It's a sad day when political divisions become the sole defining characteristics of humans, as if they do not belong to bigger and more important categories as a person and a fellow American. Both sides of the aisle are guilty in different ways and to different degrees. But rooted in the American spirit is a willingness to do this very hard and non-glorious work of helping those in need at great risk to our own safety and livelihood, even to our own lives, to care for even our enemies, because we care more about humanity than ideology. To parents who are listening, one of the greatest gifts you can give to build up our nation is teaching your children to love and serve others, especially their enemies. And just maybe, we can all work together at appreciating and honoring what is worth honoring, even when we disagree with this or that thing about a person. We could use more of that today, don't you think? What from Dr. Edwards Walker's life and sacrifice shines for you to follow? Think about it. Thank you for listening. Please like, follow, and subscribe for more content preserving freedom to the next generation. As always, this content is brought to you by the Old Glory Coin Token. If you want to support our effort to preserve freedom for the next generation, please consider holding the Old Glory Coin Token and sending these messages along to people you know who want to do the same.